Welcome to another episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast, coming to you every Thursday. And I'm incredibly excited by our guest this week. I'm happy to welcome Chris Cuffe, who I'll allow to introduce himself. And welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm not sure if you'd use the word doyen or some, an incredibly influential person in the history of probably financial services in Australia, but also incredibly involved in and putting a lot of time and effort into philanthropy. So the big topic we want to talk about today is philanthropy, giving in retirement and giving all the way throughout, not just in retirement, but throughout your life. I think it becomes something people consider a bit more, but I might just let you introduce yourself, Chris. I could never do it justice, understand a little bit about your background, and then we can get into the nitty gritty as well.
Cool. Well, I started life as a chartered accountant for my sins and worked for various companies. A lot of people know me from being the CEO of Colonial First State, which I was for about 14 years. I was also CEO of the Challenger Group, and I was chairman of UniSuper, one of the large industry super funds I still work with. But these days I serve on many investment committees and listed investment companies, and I do a number of things to promote philanthropy in Australia in a very practical way, particularly through a fund I run and an organisation I founded called Australian Philantropic Services.
Oh, fantastic. I look forward to going a bit deeper into that too. I think it's always, we always have a lot of comments and a lot of interest around retirement in Australia. It's back in the news again lately as well. This will go to be probably topical when it goes to air as well. But you probably led, I would say was about to say worked for, but led two of the most eponymous names for retirement in Challenger and Colonial, and also work in the public office sector as well. Have you got any views on how Australia has done and positioned themselves in terms of retirement, and what the future looks like for retirement in Australia as well?
Well, certainly in the case of the accumulation phase of a person's life, accumulating superannuation, Australia has been a real leader in the world. I think there's not much doubt about that. We punch well above our weight and done a very good job. But it's been well reported in the press that we're not that creative on the retirement side when people need to draw down their superannuation. There are newer products coming to market and people are trying to get to grips with it still. Things like annuities, it's not everybody's cup of tea. People are looking for different alternatives. And I do believe you will see in the next few years many more drawdown products, retirement products come into the market. In fact, the government, through legislation, is now insisting that the large super funds in particular, of which I'm associated with UniSuper, but the large super funds in particular provide useful products on the retirement side. So the products exist, but they're just not too sophisticated yet. And for people with some money, they're often better to sort of work out how to draw that money down in retirement outside of any special product, just with good financial advice.
And so much of it is about personal choice, isn't it? We've written a bit. We've spoken to a few people about that. And I know there's those leaked papers. We don't want that to be, and I think there's going to be a lot of movement in this area. But it's always worth. I don't often get the chance to talk to someone with such experience in the industry, so I have to take that opportunity. Now you've turned a lot of time towards philanthropy. And I know when people have had a long career in business, that philanthropy sounds like it's just running your own charity or something like that. But I understand it's much, much bigger than that. That would very much understate. Can you talk about your work at the Australian Philanthropic?
Sure.
Maybe we'll start there and then go a bit.
Yeah, look, I'm involved in a few areas in the philanthropic sector, and I didn't want to just give money away myself. I do that, and so do many other Australians. Particularly if you've had been lucky in your career and you've been able to accumulate some money. But I've done things to try and increase the entire charitable pie in Australia. The most important thing, I guess, was around about 13 or 14 years ago, I set up an organisation you just mentioned called Australian Philanthropic Services, acronym APS, which I'll use that acronym. I set that up as as a charity with a very distinguished board and with the mission to help people do philanthropy better. So we work with over 1,000 clients, and we help them into, we give them advice to start with, and then we help them, if it's makes sense, them into vehicles known as ancillary funds. And they come in two types: private ancillary funds and public ancillary funds. And basically how that works, if you think of the superannuation sector, we have things called self-managed super funds. They're like private super funds. And most people are invested in public office super funds like UniSuper or Colonial Products or whatever. And it's very much the same in the philanthropic sector. We have these vehicles called private ancillary funds. It's your own fund, and public ancillary funds. And the deal with these are still very unknown. They were created in tax law about 25 years ago. And you set one of these things up, and when you put money into them, it's a donation. You don't get the money back, but I'll get to that. But you get 100% tax deduction on when you put money into it. And then that money sits in a pool or in an area that's invested. And each year you're required to give away a minimum of 4 or 5% to charity. So if you sort of wind that back slowly, what does that mean? It means it's broken the nexus between the timing of the tax deduction and the timing of the giving away. Because a lot of people often have sort of events which might put a bit of money in their pocket. They could sell a business or sell some Commonwealth Bank shares or whatever.
I never sell them.
And they might be thinking, look, I'm philanthropic minded, but I'm just not ready to give it all away yet. They put it into these holding vehicles and get 100% tax deduction, which might help them on their tax planning. So we've found over time, these are very popular, growing in popularity, particularly with retirees, because they're so efficient.
We've had worked with a lot of clients in that regard too, and set up quite a few with the help of accountants in the past. And I think another part of that can be where you want, you're giving away a large sum. You want framework around it, and you want your family to be involved in some case, where they add their family to the board.
Yeah, I think our feedback with our clients, with the family involvement is crucial. But just to finish off, so I set up Australian Philanthropic Services. It now has a staff of about 40 people that it helps administer around $2.5 billion of capital that has been tagged for the charitable sector. Each year, about 160 billion is given away by our clients, and the satisfaction level is high, very high. Another thing I did around about the same time, I set up about 16 years ago, I set up an Australian equities fund. So for people who want exposure to Australian shares, and I set it up in a structure investing with other well-known or well-trusted fund managers. So it's a fund of fund structure.
Yeah.
And everybody waives their fees, and there's a fee charged at the top of that structure, which I give to charities. So this Australian shares vehicle, which has been, I think, a decent investment for people over the years, is called Third Link Growth Fund. It's got its own website, which is thirdlink.com.au. And each year, since it's been going, it's given away about $22 million to charity, just over that. Currently, the yearly run rate it gives away is about 1.6 or 1.7 million to a whole bunch of charities listed on the website. But it's a convenient way for people who want exposure to Australian shares to hopefully get a reasonable return, but also knowing that there's no one at the end of that sort of pocketing a profit, that charity's actually getting the profit from that. And the final thing I do is I chair a large listed investment company listed on the Australian Stock Exchange called Hearts and Minds Investments Limited, which invests in international shares. And again, everybody involved does it for free, and it gives away 1.5% per annum to medical research in Australia. So we, through Hearts and Minds Investments Limited, the ASX ticker is HM1, we give away over $10 million a year to medical research in Australia. So interesting, three sort of vehicles I've been involved.
Sure.
And you get the feeling if you're if you're awake, that each of these are giving quite large sums of money. So particularly APS, Australian Philanthropic Services, I'm really proud of that, because that was a way to set a charity itself up that was helping others, and the influence now is very large. We are the biggest provider of philanthropic services in Australia.
And I've got about 15 follow-up questions that start from there. I think the biggest one is always going to be why. I know. I talk. I hear it. You hear it all the time. I'm not sure how specific the stats are, but that Australia, in comparison to globally, isn't particularly big at charitable giving. I'm not sure whether that's a driver, but why you're basically doing all these things and there's no commercial benefit for charity. And it seems I'd like to understand what's the driver. What keeps you going?
Well, when I set up Australian Philanthropic Services, it was after my own experience of setting up a private ancillary fund. In 2007, my family set one up. I didn't know much about them at the time, but I was ready to put a pool of money aside to give away to charity in the future. I thought this concept of getting a tax deduction on day one and giving away 5% per annum made a lot of sense in my circumstances. So I set that up, but the experience of setting it up was not great. First of all, hardly anybody knew anything about them. It was a very expensive experience. I needed accountants and lawyers and philanthropic advisors. It took a long time to set up. And after putting it in place, which I'm really glad I did. It was just, getting out of the blocks was just hard. But a couple of years after, I thought, look, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And somebody needs to be a one-stop shop expert. And that was the genesis of setting up Australian Philanthropic Services. So we now set these vehicles up for people at a very nominal rate. We do it very quickly. We have a very good reputation with the regulatory authorities, being Australian Tax Office and the Australian Charities Commission. And we have very solid technical advice. We do the whole thing, and the feedback is just wonderful. So, one of the reasons, apart from increasing philanthropy in Australia, because I thought there were roadblocks just because we didn't have the right structures, but I can say the payment for me personally is enormous satisfaction that something's been created that the Australian public can use now, and it'll be there forever.
I think there's always that question of do I have enough to be doing this? Do you have evidence or numbers around private versus public? What's the difference between the two? And then in terms of numbers, what metrics do you see on people starting their private funds?
Yeah, well, look, if you think you want to get involved in philanthropy and you've got sufficient money, our sort of rules of thumb are, if you've got $1 million or more to put aside, you would start your own private ancillary fund. And that's very similar to the superannuation. It's self-managed super fund. Many people say, a good entry level is probably around the $1 million mark. Some say less, but it doesn't matter. It's a larger sum of money that not everybody can do. But at that level, that's where you go in. If you want to be involved in this, but you don't want your own vehicle and you haven't got enough to pass go, so to speak, then with as a small amount as I think it's $40,000, you can create an account, we call it a giving fund, in the Australian Philanthropic Services Foundation, and away you go. You get a full tax deduction for that. The foundation itself has hundreds of people with accounts in it. It's a large pool of money, about $400 million. Yours truly manages that. So I have a lot of fun managing the investments. And each year, the clients who are of that pool, they tell us who to give their 4% away to each year, which charities. We handle all that. We check all the charitable status. We check bank accounts so there's no fraud, and away we go. So that's sort of the rule of thumb of which pool you go into. But you really don't have to be sort of overly rich to get involved in philanthropy. As I say, these pooled structures, $40,000 a year is sort of the point. And look, with these structures, back to your original question, there has been criticism of Australians over the years saying they don't give as much to the charitable sector compared to, say, the US or European counterparts. And I was always, whilst the statistics do show that, but that was also one of my rationales for setting up APS. I thought there's just not enough information out there to help people do this. And you've got to remember, in both Europe and the US, there are hundreds of years. There's deep history of people creating big foundations, big famous foundations, whether it's the Rockefeller or Ford Foundation or whatever. It's ingrained in society. Also, the tax laws give, in the US in particular, or state laws, I should say, give a lot of incentive to give money away before you die. But I think Australia is coming of age. There's more people getting interested. We're seeing a different generation. So as the baby boomers are retiring, often or passing away, passing money on to another generation, there's a generation coming through that is very philanthropic minded, and I'm sure we will see philanthropy increase in Australia.
And do you think apart from the challenges of structures, what do you think it is that stops Australians from giving more? Is it the...
Oh, look, I don't think it's talked about openly either. Like if you're in America, you might sit around the table and all boast about who gives
how much we give away, yeah.
How much we gave away and who put their name on what building. Obviously, that's at a very big level. I think Australians are more private about giving. But I do honestly think it's a lot to do with a lack of information out there. We know, so Australian Philanthropic Services, a lot of people come to us directly, so you can find us on the website. Just type in australianphilanthropicservices.com.au.
We'll put the link in the show notes too for everyone.
Yep, and but a lot of business comes to us via wealth advisors. Now, so we have people who are out in the field talking to wealth advisors all the time, but we know only a small percentage of wealth advisors know anything about this area. And that proves to us always that it's just people don't know what they don't know. And once people understand how this works, we find that more than 60% of people who then open the bonnet, say, on us and look into what is this, they end up signing up. They find it so satisfying to do. So I just think it's a lack of awareness is the biggest issue at the moment.
And I think one of the big things we talk about in our business anyway is the legacy years and estate planning. Do you see more conversations, like living conversations around philanthropy, or more giving in the will or once they pass? I know superannuation's not conducive to charitable donations either, so maybe we'll delve into that. But
yeah, we definitely, the conversations about giving while you're living or setting up structures that take over the second you pass is very real and really taking off now. In fact, again, in APS, we're really helping people do that. We help people put the right wording in their wills and the like. But something, as a great example here, something people both don't know. If you happen to be lucky enough, let's say you have a share portfolio. Let's say you had Commonwealth shares that you bought at the float for next to nothing, a few bucks, now worth 150 or 40 or whatever it is. Huge unrealized gains. When you pass, you could, normally what happens is people wind up an estate, so you sell everything and then give it away to the beneficiaries. If you sell your Commonwealth Bank shares, then of course your estate's going to pay a very hefty tax bill on that. But people often don't know you could donate those shares to an existing charity or a foundation, and escape your estate would not pay tax on that. So there's no tax for that. The foundation or charity that received that, so they'd receive those shares, they can then sell them and get the benefit of using the money. So there's very easy stuff you can do like that, which is great from a estate planning point of view. But the point is, we are seeing people increasingly naming foundations in their will or setting things up while they're alive. Private ancillary funds again, or a public ancillary fund, you set it up, set your account up. You might start putting money in it while you're alive. You involve your children. Your will or letter of intent that sits alongside a will often will say, when I pass, can these children or these relatives take over directing where the donations go to or any other detail? It's certainly something that's just not being left till after the event now to executors to work out.
I'm finding it more and more often as financial advisors that we're seeing it brought forward. I think, and it can actually reduce complexity as well. Not asking for your opinion on this, probably more of a statement that giving from an estate can be when you pass, can be very emotional for the family left over to see a portion of those assets. It's bringing it forward for particularly where there's been business sales or transaction. It seems you're able to involve every level of the family a bit more and get a better understanding, I think, than leaving it.
There's no doubt about that. And look, why wouldn't you, if you do feel you've got excess assets to your needs and you feel you've appropriately provided for your children or whatever, or the spouse in your estate, and you feel there's excess funds, why wouldn't you do it while you're alive and get a kick out of it? I mean, think of the enormous, as I said at the start, I set Australian Philanthropic Services up as a charity. That my own PAF was a big donor to that. I had to kick the thing off. I have no better satisfaction than doing that, or through my own charitable giving, or to helping other organisations I have done in time, and I can see the benefits. I mean, I want to enjoy it while I'm alive.
No, it's fantastic. And so where do you see things go wrong most often? Is it particularly if we're talking about PAFs and private entities, is it around the administration and challenges?
It's a specialised area of law, and I said at the start, my own experience was clunky and expensive. So people who don't use an expert like APS often, might be suburban accountants or whatever, that they sort of think they know what they're doing, but this is a specialised area that people do make mistakes in. So, you might give money away from the private ancillary fund or the public ancillary to a charity that's not what they call DGR1, deductible gift recipient status. Item 1, they might give to the wrong types. Their own PAF may not be set up correctly. There's regulatory reporting got to be done every year. People did just the little things, that perhaps when you're retired, you don't really want to do. And that's, again, one of my motivations. I wanted to set an organisation up that could run on the sniff of an oily rag, because it was a charitable organisation, and make it just so easy for people so they can't make these mistakes.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think it's a perfect kind of switch, I think, to the Third Link Growth Fund, where you're spending, I won't even guess where you're spending most of your time, hopefully out cycling and kind of enjoying the Sydney weather. But can we talk a bit more about the Third Link Growth Fund, how it's growing, why it started, and how you run it, and what the ultimate objective is there?
Well, the genesis of Third Link Growth Fund, as I say, has been running for about 16 years. It's what's called a managed investment scheme. Anybody can invest in it. $20,000 is the minimum, and it is an Australian share fund. Now, I set that up, and I mentioned briefly at the start, it's what's called a fund of funds. So my fund, Third Link Growth Fund, invests the money of my clients that come into this with other fund managers underneath. And they're fund managers that I've handpicked and have a lot of time for, and learned over the years how good they are. So one of my motivations in putting it together, I thought, I think I know a thing or two about investing. I've been in the investment world for a long time. I've mixed with a lot of fund managers. I think I know who are the better ones out there. And I could put a vehicle together where people get to invest with the best fund managers just through a single fund, and where that fund itself, the fees that it charges clients, is donated to charity. So there were two benefits there. Hopefully people were getting a first-class investment. And in fact, Third Link Growth Fund, which you can see on the website, it's a fund that has beaten the mainstream indexes, we call them, benchmarks, since it's been running in its current form. So not many funds do that after fees. So it's a good, solid investment, hand-picked managers underneath, managers that I'm watching all the time. You just got someone looking over. But the benefit again is a charity over the top there. So different groups over the years have had enormous benefit from me donating to them from this fund. So it's a really interesting way for investors to feel like they're contributing to charity without having to put their hand in their pocket.
And who do you see? Yeah, who do you see as investors? Do you naturally attract private ancillary funds as investors into there as well?
Private ancillary funds do invest in Third Link, but it's really for anybody who's an investor. You don't have to, even if you didn't enjoy philanthropy, even if it didn't give any money away, an investor who wants exposure to Australian shares might say, "Hey, that's a pretty neat way to do it, because with $20,000 minimum, I can be exposed to 10 to a dozen different managers underneath. I can get a single report, and I've got someone watching over it the whole time." I think that's a great value add.
And is there a broader theme of the charities you're supporting through Third Link Growth Fund? I know you talked about Hearts and Minds, and that was very much medical research. Is it specific or broad?
It's much broader these days. In the earlier days, I was very much focused on charities helping children and teenagers. Whilst I still support those, I guess I'm getting broader. So there's groups over time. One group that I have a lot of time for these days is the Grattan Institute, which is a not-for-profit group, which helps, in my language, helps keep the bastards honest. I never know whether politicians are telling me fact or fiction anymore. I've just given up. So I think a group like the Grattan Institute does a marvellous job in sifting through what really is factual and then giving advice to the politicians. So politicians and their advisors, often Grattan is a port of call. Things like not everybody's cup of tea, but I've been a big believer in helping get the laws passed for voluntary assisted dying, which is laws all across Australia, the various states. Help there. We've helped in the what's called the Ethics Centre, helping centre people with ethics and understanding how its role in society. These are not-for-profits. Some of these are groups which aren't particularly sexy, so to speak, but they are not-for-profits. They are charities. They require funding, and I think they do a great job in society. But also still, spread the money around to many other groups. All the groups supported since day one are all listed on the Third Link website.
Yeah, I thought so. And you're probably almost to the dollar. You'd be able to find out I'm sure there's a statement somewhere you'd be able to track down if you're interested.
You could be, and being an accountant by background, everything is done to the dollar. In fact, everything is probably done to the cent.
The cent somewhere for sure. It's been an incredible chat, and I have to ask the question. And this is, you've had every right to retire, probably at any point in the last 10 years. My big question is, what does retirement look like for you? Just for our audience. And I think you do have an AM as well, don't you? From my understanding. Well,
look, retirement is one of those words which, they say, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Everybody has a different view of what it means to them and what gives them satisfaction. I was born being an A-type personality. I really can't sit still, and I get a lot of these things we've talked about, including my commercial interests of sitting on investment committees and the like. People would probably say that's my work. Well, for me, it's a hobby. I think I haven't worked for about 20 years. I've just had fun doing these things, meeting lots of great people. Sometimes it gets a bit heavy and I think, gee, I wouldn't mind a rest today, but I'm genuinely busy but not rushed. So that's what I think. If you had to use the word retirement, to be busy but not rushed and do the things you want to, that ticks a lot of boxes. Outside of that stuff, so I'll probably do that until the day I lose my marbles, which who knows. But I do play the odd game of golf pretty poorly, although actually I'm erratic, I should say. For those golfers on the line who know how to play Stableford, I get a 5-pointer about every 6 months, which people don't believe, but it just shows how erratic I am. I do a bit of bike riding. I do a bit of kayaking, but it's just just whatever. My days are filled from start to finish, and I love it being that way.
And the final thing we always ask for any guest that comes on is if you had to leave one thing for our listeners to do or to take away, what would that be?
Well, it's taken me 65 years perhaps to work out that the greatest satisfaction you can have in life is to help other people. I have no doubt about that. And whether it's, and you do it within your means. Some people can do it with money, some people can do it with time, but just helping other people really is an amazing thing. I wish we had more of our leaders doing that too. It might be a better society to live in, but you get a lot of kick out of.
And for sure, I think that's what we find, Will, and that's why we're so happily involved in podcasts and providing information. So I think the key is being in an informed position to say you then have the ability to, or the confidence to give and, be giving up some of your capital in that regard too. So I think the perfect way to finish, and I have to say thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Incredibly great conversation. Hopefully we can catch up again at another point in your retirement in the next 20 years. But yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.